Explainer: the House Republicans' risky debt limit gambit. Republicans in Congress, led by House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, are threatening to vote against raising the country's debt ceiling unless President Joe Biden and Democratic lawmakers agree to significant spending cuts. Experts say that if Congress does not act to raise the debt limit and the United States defaults on its debt, the economic consequences will be disastrous. The national debt is approximately $31.5 trillion. The government cannot borrow more than $31.381 trillion under current law. This figure is referred to as the debt limit. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen stated that the federal government has begun using extraordinary measures, such as moving funds from one government account to another and suspending investments in retirement funds, to buy time before the country defaults on its debt. However, without a legislative fix, the country may be unable to pay its debts as early as June. Gene Ross, Senior Fellow for Economic Policy at the Center for American Progress, and Paul Vanda Water, Senior Fellow at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, spoke with the American Independent Foundation. Both stated that lawmakers must act to avoid a debt default and that the debate itself could be detrimental to the economy. What exactly is the debt ceiling? Every year, the federal government incurs a budget deficit if it spends more than it receives. The Treasury Department can borrow money to cover the shortfall with the approval of Congress. These loans are added to the national debt and accumulate interest over time. Except for a few years during President Bill Clinton's presidency, the national debt has been increasing for decades. Congress limits the amount of borrowing that the federal government can do. It has voted 78 times to raise or ignore the ceiling. The debt limit does not authorize new spending commitments, according to the Treasury Department's website. It simply allows the government to finance existing legal obligations that both parties' Congresses and presidents have made in the past. Where does the national debt originate? Approximately 63% of the budget is dedicated to mandatory spending on safety net programs such as Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Some Republican lawmakers, including McCarthy, have stated that cuts to Medicare and Social Security are not an option, while others have proposed cuts to these popular programs. The Republican Study Committee, a group of approximately 170 House Republicans, hopes to raise the Medicare eligibility age from 65 to 67. National defense and veterans benefits account for roughly half of the federal government's discretionary spending. Some House Republicans have suggested that defense spending, which they successfully pushed for an increase in just last year, should be avoided as well. On January 8, Texas Representative Tony Gonzalez told CBS News that such cuts would be a horrible idea. To make a significant dent in the deficit without cutting those programs, drastic cuts would be required in everything else, from transportation, education, and public health to clean air and water, as well as other safety net programs. It would have a devastating effect on programs critical to the U.S. economy, Ross said. What's the big deal about raising the debt ceiling? The nonpartisan United States Government Accountability Office stated in a blog post in September 2021 that having a statutory debt limit has two significant drawbacks. The debt ceiling has no effect on the amount of debt. Instead, it is a post hoc measure that limits the Treasury's ability to borrow to finance decisions already made by Congress and the President, it said. Second, it stated that delays in raising the debt ceiling can disrupt financial markets, increase U.S. borrowing costs, and threaten the United States' full faith and credit. The current arrangement between Congress and the Treasury, according to Vanda Water, works only insofar as the Congress is responsible and takes prompt action to increase the limit when it is needed. He claims that many members are not being responsible at the moment. What is the current conflict about? Biden and congressional Democrats have made it clear that the debt limit must be raised or suspended. Republicans in Congress have been much more difficult to pin down. On January 24, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said it was up to McCarthy to find a solution with Biden, noting that even a bipartisan Senate debt agreement could actually pass this particular House. McCarthy has refused to provide a specific plan for what to cut, despite repeated requests from Biden and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. In any case, it's unclear whether his fractious and narrow majority will agree on a plan. The bottom line is that the debt ceiling must be raised or suspended, period, said Vanda Water. Thinking that the federal government can suddenly be required to stop borrowing and that there are ways to make that happen, to avoid the negative consequences, is just wishful thinking. Why is the political standoff over the debt ceiling so dangerous? Since 1979, Congress and the White House have sparred over debt ceiling increases, but there has never been a default. In 2011, however, the Republican majority in the House refused to raise the debt ceiling unless President Barack Obama and Senate Democrats agreed to cut federal spending. Democrats compromised at the last minute, agreeing to cap discretionary spending in exchange for an increase in the debt limit. Obama and then Vice President Biden reportedly vowed never to negotiate the debt ceiling again. Even the prospect of a default alarmed credit rating agencies. Standard & Poor's downgraded the country's long-term debt rating from AAA to AA. According to a 2012 Government Accountability Office report, the market uncertainty caused by the delays increased the government's borrowing costs by about $1.3 billion in the 2011 fiscal year. I believe you are aware that most countries do not have this, Ross observed. Congress retains control of the purse strings through the federal budget process. I think it's difficult to argue why we need the debt ceiling. What if Congress fails to act to raise the debt ceiling? Last October, key House Republicans indicated that if they regained control of the House in the 2022 midterm elections, they would use the debt limit to force major spending cuts. Vanda Water told the American Independent Foundation that in the event of a default, the Treasury would have to either delay paying its bills or make drastic spending cuts, possibly amounting to 20% of total spending. He warned that such a large cut would be a huge shock to the economy. Given that many people believe we're already on the verge of a recession, another big cut in government spending would undoubtedly push us over the edge into recession territory, he added. These dire predictions were echoed in a paper published in September 2021 by economists at Moody's Analytics, who warned, shutting the government down would not be an immediate hit to the economy, but a default would be a catastrophic blow to the nascent economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Global financial markets and the economy would be disrupted, and even if quickly resolved, Americans would be forced to pay for this default for generations.